The cold vastness of space was quiet until the alarms began blaring across the Sci-Fi Dominion Sector 47. Inside the massive command station orbiting the gas giant Velicor, alien officers rushed to their stations, confused and alarmed. The early warning sensors had detected something that should not be here. A human war vessel had entered their sector. Admiral Threx, a towering Sci-Fi warrior with dark, scaled skin and piercing yellow eyes, sat in his command chair, watching the holographic display before him. The ship's silhouette was unmistakable, even without magnification. Its blocky, armored structure and aggressive design belonged to only one species, humans. A low murmur spread among the officers, some shifting nervously in their seats. The Sci-Fi Dominion had defeated countless civilizations and crushed rebellions across the galaxy. But humanity was different. "They are primitive," one officer scoffed, breaking the tension. "Their empire is young. Their technology is less advanced than ours." Another officer, however, spoke in a hushed voice. "Yet, they never surrender." Threx remained silent, eyes fixed on the lone warship displayed before him. The ship, identified as the HSV Indomitable, was not moving aggressively. It simply floated, silent and still, like a predator watching its prey. Threx took a deep breath and spoke at last. "Send a transmission. Aboard the HSV Indomitable." The bridge of the Indomitable was dimly lit, its controls humming softly as the ship floated within enemy territory. Captain Rourke, a grizzled veteran with sharp blue eyes, sat in his chair, reading the incoming message from the Sci-Fi Dominion. The transmission was simple. "Unidentified human vessel, you have entered restricted space. Surrender immediately or face destruction." Rourke smirked. "Same old arrogance," he muttered. He turned to his communications officer, a young woman named Lieutenant Hayes, who was waiting for his order. "Send them our message," Rourke said calmly. Hayes nodded and pressed a button, relaying their response. "This sector is under our protection. Leave now." Back at the Sci-Fi command station, Admiral Threx's eyes narrowed as the human transmission arrived. The sheer audacity of their message stunned him. A single warship dared to threaten an entire fleet. Fury burned inside him. But he kept his voice calm. "Charge all weapons. Surround the vessel. I want it disabled immediately." The Sci-Fi fleet, consisting of 10 powerful warships, moved into attack positions, forming a deadly circle around the lone human vessel. The Sci-Fi officers watched their screens, waiting for Indomitable to panic, to attempt escape, or to send a message begging for mercy. But the human ship did nothing. It just hovered in place, its cold metallic surface reflecting the light of the nearby star. Threx clenched his fists. Something felt wrong. "This is your final warning, human vessel," his communications officer transmitted. "Surrender, or we will open fire." Silence. Threx's patience ran out. Fire. The first shot. The Sci-Fi warships launched their plasma cannons, deadly streaks of energy lighting up space as they raced toward the Indomitable. But before impact, the human vessel suddenly vanished. Gasps filled the Sci-Fi command station. Confused officers scrambled to check their sensors. "Where did it go?" one shouted. "Impossible. Our weapons passed through empty space." Threx felt a chill crawl up his spine. The Indomitable had not dodged. It had not activated shields. It had simply disappeared. Then, alarms blared again. "Sir," a Sci-Fi officer shouted, "it's behind us." Threx spun to the monitors. There it was. The Indomitable had reappeared, now floating behind the Sci-Fi fleet without making a sound. The Sci-Fi had seen many battles. They had faced powerful enemies. But never had they seen a ship defy the laws of war itself. Threx swallowed hard. He had underestimated the humans, and now it might be too late. Admiral Threx stood at the center of the Sci-Fi command station, his mind racing. The sudden disappearance of the HSV Indomitable had left him feeling uneasy. His warships had fired on it, and yet it was as if the human vessel had simply vanished into thin air. The officers at the stations around him scrambled to analyze the situation. On every screen, the human warship had disappeared, only to reappear moments later, always behind their ships. It wasn't just dodging. They could not even track its movement. "Prepare for evasive maneuvers," Frex commanded, his voice steady but filled with concern. The pride he once held in his fleet began to crack. He had believed that nothing could defeat the Sci-Fi. Now, facing a single human warship, he realized how little he understood about them. "Sir, we are being jammed," shouted one of the officers, the tension clear in his voice. "All communications are down. The human ship is interfering with our systems." Frex's jaw clenched. This was no ordinary warship. He had underestimated the humans, something he had never done before. As a warrior, he prided himself on never being caught off guard, but today, the humans were changing everything. He slammed his fist onto the armrest of his chair, his frustration rising. The humans were simply too bold, too unpredictable. He had to admit, they were unlike anything the Sci-Fi had ever faced. "Get me a direct line to the fleet commanders," Frex ordered. His eyes flickered to the view screen, where the Indomitable now hovered just beyond their reach. The human ship seemed calm, almost mocking in its stillness. It was as though the crew of the Indomitable knew exactly what they were doing, like they had seen this all before. And that terrified Thrax even more. The Sci-Fi had faced larger, more powerful enemies, but none had ever been so silent. Aboard the HSV Indomitable, Captain Rourke stood in front of the large view screen, watching the Zephyr fleet move in. He had expected this kind of response, arrogance and overconfidence. The Sci-Fi, like many alien species, believed they were the superior force in the galaxy. But Rourke knew better. "Lieutenant Hayes," Rourke said, turning toward his communications officer, "prepare the next message. Let them know they have one last chance." Hayes nodded and quickly typed in the message. She looked up at Rourke. "Sending now, sir." The message went out. "You have been warned. Leave the sector immediately. If you don't, we will respond accordingly." Rourke turned his attention back to the view of the Sci-Fi fleet. The Sci-Fi had already opened fire, and their ships were closing in, eager to destroy the human vessel. They believed that this was going to be another easy victory, just like the others. But Rourke had seen the potential of the human race. They had ingenuity, something the Sci-Fi had not accounted for. The Indomitable was not just another ship. It was an extension of humanity's willpower. The Sci-Fi didn't understand that. "Captain," Hayes said with a hint of urgency, "they're preparing to fire again. We need to take action." Rourke smiled slightly. "We will. Activate the phase shift." Back at the Sci-Fi command station, Admiral Threx watched his fleet move into position. The Indomitable was surrounded, its options for escape now limited. The human ship couldn't possibly survive an all-out attack from the full force of the Sci-Fi fleet, or so Threx thought. "Activate weapons," Threx ordered. His voice was firm, but there was an edge of doubt in his mind. "This time, make sure it's finished." He watched closely as the Sci-Fi warships fired, massive beams of plasma energy streaking through space toward the human ship. For a moment, there was silence. Then, the impossible happened. Instead of the beams of energy crashing into the Indomitable, they vanished. The energy seemed to disperse before hitting the ship, like it had been absorbed into thin air. The Sci-Fi officers stared in disbelief. What just happened?" one of them asked, his voice quivering. "We couldn't even see the energy waves, sir," another officer said, eyes wide with panic. "Their shields, it's as if they redirected the blast somehow." Frex's fists tightened. The human ship wasn't just surviving. It was countering their most powerful weapons with ease. This was beyond anything he had expected. "Move into close range," Frex commanded. "Get within weapons range. We'll crush them before they can react." But just as he gave the order, The Indomitable did something no Sci-Fi ship had ever done. It disappeared again. Before any of the Sci-Fi officers could react, the human ship reappeared right in the middle of their fleet, surrounded by ships, but untouchable. Threx's heart skipped a beat. The Indomitable had moved faster than anything in his fleet could track, and in the blink of an eye, it was in the perfect position to strike. The Sci-Fi fleet was in a state of utter chaos. The HSV Indomitable had disappeared yet again, this time right in front of them, reappearing behind their lines. Seemingly without any effort, the Sci-Fi warships, huge and powerful, had no idea how to react to such an enemy. They had been prepared for a fight, but this was beyond their understanding. Admiral Threx stood rigid in his chair, staring at the screens, his yellow eyes narrowed with frustration and fear. He had never once doubted the strength of the Sci-Fi fleet. The Sci-Fi had destroyed entire civilizations, wiped out the strongest empires in the galaxy, but this human ship was unlike anything they had ever faced. "How is this possible?" one of his officers whispered, his voice trembling. "Their ship doesn't even seem to be moving. But it's everywhere." At the same time, Threx could only stare, speechless. This was not how battles were supposed to go. "Admiral," another officer called out, "our communications are completely jammed. We can't send or receive any transmissions from the rest of the fleet. We're completely cut off." Threx clenched his fists. Nothing was going right. They were fighting a battle with no control, against a species that had somehow discovered a way to fight outside the boundaries of what was considered possible. "Target that human ship," Threx ordered, his voice sharp. "Prepare the heavy disruptors and lock on. We'll burn it out of existence once and for all." Aboard the HSV Indomitable, Captain Rourke watched the unfolding situation on the Indomitable's view screen, his face calm and focused. The Sci-Fi were in complete disarray, their fleet moving in unpredictable patterns, not knowing where to fire or where the human ship had gone. "Lieutenant Hayes," Rourke said, his voice steady, "engage phase shift once more. Let them think they're winning." Hayes nodded, pressing a series of commands into the ship's console. The ship shimmered briefly, disappearing once again, this time to a new location on the edge of the battle. On the screen, the Sci-Fi fleet continued to move frantically, trying to position themselves to strike the Indomitable. But it was all in vain. Every time they fired, their blasts met nothing but empty space. The Indomitable had somehow mastered a technology that made them feel as though they were fighting shadows, always one step behind. Rourke allowed himself a small smile. Humanity had fought hard to get to this point. The technology aboard the Indomitable was not just advanced. It was brilliant, the result of years of human ingenuity, a tribute to humanity's creativity. But what was even more important was human resilience, the human ability to keep pushing forward, no matter the odds. This wasn't just about technology, it was about mindset. He could sense the fear rising among the Sci-Fi. They had never expected humans to be capable of this. They had underestimated humanity, and now they would pay the price for their arrogance. Back at the Sci-Fi command station, Admiral Threx's fingers twitched. The Indomitable had shifted again, this time so fast that his fleet couldn't even register the movement. He saw nothing on his radar, no ship to target. He felt an overwhelming sense of helplessness. "Where is it?" Threx shouted. "Where is that damned ship?" A voice came from one of his officers. "Sir, we've lost all radar contact. We can't even track their energy signatures anymore." Threx's rage boiled over. This was no longer a simple battle. This was becoming a mockery. The Sci-Fi had faced challenges before, but this was a threat to everything they stood for. "Send a fleet-wide command," Threx growled, barely containing his fury. "We need to regroup. We'll break through their defenses. All ships converge on the center. We'll crush them under a single wave." Aboard the HSV Indomitable, as the Sci-Fi fleet struggled to find any advantage, Captain Rourke was already calculating his next move. His crew was calm, focused, and ready to end this engagement. They had achieved their goal. They had shown the Zephyr that humanity was not to be underestimated. Lieutenant Hayes, Rourke said, "It's time. Initiate the final phase." Hayes quickly tapped a sequence of keys. There was a slight hum throughout the ship, followed by a noticeable change in the atmosphere. "What's happening?" one of the crew members asked. "We're no longer invisible," Rourke said with a quiet confidence. "Now they will see us clearly, but by the time they do, it will be too late." The final strike. Suddenly, the Indomitable reappeared, this time right in the middle of the Zephyr fleet, surrounded by at least half a dozen of their largest ships. The Zephyr commanders, now fully aware of the human ship's location, turned their attention to it. Weapons were charged, and the fleet was preparing to fire everything they had. But before they could react, the Indomitable launched its counterstrike. In the blink of an eye, the human ship fired a single devastating blast, hitting the nearest Zephyr battleship directly in its engine core. The explosion was massive, tearing apart the Zephyr ship in an instant. "Impossible," one officer cried out. "Their weapon, it's like nothing we've ever seen." Admiral Threx watched in horror as the human ship's energy cannon tore through the fabric of his fleet. One ship after another began to fall, as if they were nothing more than fragile toys in the hands of a much greater force. The Zephyr fleet was in utter disarray. The Indomitable's single shot had shattered the massive battleship, and the shockwave rippled across the fleet. One by one, the remaining ships were either destroyed or severely damaged. A quiet, heavy sense of dread hung in the air. The Zephyr Empire, once a proud and feared force, was facing a humiliating defeat at the hands of a single human warship. Admiral Threx stood frozen, watching the destruction unfold on the viewscreen. His mind raced. This was supposed to be a simple victory, a routine mission to eliminate an intruder. But now, their pride, their confidence was in tatters. The human vessel, Indomitable, was proving to be something far beyond their comprehension. One of his officers, visibly shaken, turned toward him. "Sir, we've lost half the fleet. The remaining ships are in retreat. They can't keep up with the human ship. Our weapons are ineffective against their technology." Threx's claws dug into the armrests of his chair as he clenched his teeth. The realization had finally hit him. The Zephyr were being defeated by a species they once considered insignificant. Humanity had turned the tables with their unpredictable tactics, superior technology, and unyielding willpower. "Why are they so different?" Threx muttered to himself. He had fought countless species, but none had fought with this kind of ferocity and adaptability. The humans were not just skilled warriors. They were survivors, thinkers, and innovators. "Admiral, our shields are failing. We need to retreat," another officer shouted, panic evident in their voice. The officers around him began to argue, their voices growing louder as the reality of their situation set in. Threx took a deep breath, trying to regain control. "No," he said firmly, his voice cutting through the panic. "We cannot retreat. We will not allow these humans to believe they can defeat the mighty Zephyr." His words were defiant, but even as he spoke, he knew they were no longer in control of the battle. The Indomitable was everywhere and nowhere all at once, appearing and disappearing with precision, attacking from impossible angles, and leaving the Zephyr in complete confusion. Aboard the HSV Indomitable, Captain Rourke stood at the center of the bridge, his hands clasped behind his back. He could feel the pressure mounting as the battle wore on. The Zephyr were powerful, yes, but they lacked what humanity had: creativity, resilience, and an unbreakable will to succeed, no matter the odds. "Lieutenant Hayes," Rourke said, his voice calm and steady, "I want all remaining Zephyr ships to hear our final message." Hayes nodded and began typing on her console. Within moments, the message was ready to send. "This sector is now under human protection. Leave immediately. If you do not, you will face the consequences." The message was simple but clear. Work wasn't here to destroy the Zifar or start a war. But they had come into human territory, and they were not leaving without understanding who truly controlled this space. "Send it," Work ordered. Hayes pressed the button, sending the message to every Zifar ship still functional. The message echoed across the sector, carried by the unyielding presence of the Indomitable. Back at the Zifar command station, Admiral Threx stared at the communication feed, his eyes narrowing as he read the human message. "Leave immediately. Face the consequences." The arrogance of it. How dare they? The Zifar had never been forced to heed the orders of a weaker species, and yet here they were in the very heart of their domain, being told to leave by humans. "Send word to all fleet commanders," Threx growled. "We are not retreating. We will break them. We will crush them under our might." He stood up, pacing around the command station. His mind was racing. This was the turning point. If the Zifar allowed this defeat to stand, their entire empire would lose its power. But the Indomitable and its crew had proven too elusive, too powerful. Threx had no choice but to contemplate the unthinkable. "We will fight one last time," he said, more to himself than anyone else. "Prepare the planet killer cannon." Aboard the HSV Indomitable, Rourke had anticipated the Zifar would not give up easily. They were a proud species, one built on warfare and conquest. But Rourke was ready. The Indomitable was prepared for whatever came next. Humanity had faced much worse in the past and had never backed down. "Lieutenant Hayes, what's the status of their fleet?" Rourke asked, his eyes never leaving the view screen. "Sir," Hayes responded after a brief pause, "they're preparing something. It's their planet killer cannon. It's a massive weapon designed to destroy entire planets in one shot." Rourke's face remained calm, but he could feel the weight of the situation. He had faced some tough choices in his career, but now was the time to prove humanity's resolve. The Zifar might have the most destructive weapon in the galaxy, but they had no idea what the Indomitable was capable of. "Activate phase shift," Rourke ordered. "We'll make sure they can't lock onto us." Back at the Zifar command station, the Zifar were ready. The planet killer cannon was aimed in charge, its massive barrel pointing at the Indomitable's last known position. Threx took a deep breath, preparing for what he believed would be their final strike. "Fire," he commanded. But as the planet killer cannon fired, something incredible happened. The Indomitable wasn't there. The Indomitable had disappeared again. The massive blast passed right through the empty space where the ship had been only moments before. Threx's heart sank. How was this possible? The Indomitable had anticipated their every move. He felt a chill run down his spine. The Zifar fleet was now broken. The once proud warships, feared across the galaxy, were scattered and damaged. They had no way of tracking the human ship, the HSV Indomitable, which had managed to evade every attack with a speed and precision that made it seem as though they were battling an invisible enemy. The Zifar could not comprehend how this human vessel was outwitting them so easily. Admiral Threx's mind raced. His fleet was on the brink of collapse, and every move he made seemed to be met with failure. The planet killer cannon, the weapon that had once been the pride of the Zifar Empire, had missed, failing to land even a scratch on the human vessel. The Indomitable had simply vanished again, reappearing at the perfect moment to strike at their most vulnerable ships. Threx's frustration boiled over. He had fought countless battles. But this one was different. This human ship, this Indomitable, was not just fighting for victory. It was fighting for something more, a message. The humans had shown the Zifar that they could not simply conquer whatever they wished. Humanity was a force to be reckoned with, and the Zifar had underestimated them. He turned to his officers. "We need to regroup," Threx said, his voice tight with anger. "We can't keep reacting like this. We need a plan, or we will lose this entire sector." One of his officers, a young Zifar strategist, spoke up. "Sir, we're out of options. We've lost contact with the rest of the fleet, and our ships are too damaged to continue. The human ship is too fast. Even our best weapons can't hit it. Threx's eyes narrowed. He had been taught to never admit defeat, but now he faced the reality of the situation. Then we'll have to rely on what we do best. Raw power, Threx growled. We'll use the last of our strength to force them out. We may not win, but we'll make them understand we are not to be underestimated. Aboard the HSV Indomitable, Captain Rourke stood tall on the bridge, his eyes scanning the chaotic battle unfolding before him. The Sci-Fi fleet was crumbling, but he knew they wouldn't give up easily. The planet killer cannon was still a threat, and the Sci-Fi were not a species that would simply admit defeat. Lieutenant Hayes, Rourke said, his voice calm. How long until their fleet is completely disabled? Hayes, her eyes focused on her console, looked up. Not long, Captain. They're down to their last few ships, but their commander is preparing something. Something big. They've activated their hypercharged weapons. I believe they're going to attempt one final strike. Rourke's brow furrowed. The Sci-Fi, though outmatched, had a history of fighting with a grit and determination that could not be ignored. They were a proud species, unwilling to surrender easily. If this was their last stand, Rourke knew the battle would only intensify. We'll be ready, Rourke said. Activate full shields, prepare the energy weapons, and set the course for the heart of their remaining fleet. As the crew scrambled to execute the orders, Rourke took a deep breath. The Sci-Fi had underestimated humanity's will to survive. The Indomitable was proof of that. Humanity had faced so many challenges, alien invasions, wars, and near extinction. And yet, they had never backed down. Now, they would show the Sci-Fi just how strong they truly were. Back at the Sci-Fi command station, Admiral Threx stood before his control panel, his eyes fixated on the tactical display. His ships were struggling, and the human vessel seemed to be everywhere. The Indomitable was like a ghost, striking from the shadows and disappearing before the Sci-Fi could retaliate. Prepare for the final charge, Threx ordered. His voice was cold, his eyes sharp with the fire of a final, desperate plan. We will give them a battle they will never forget. The remaining Sci-Fi ships aligned, forming a tight formation around the planet killer cannon. The massive weapon was the last hope the Sci-Fi had. If this attack failed, there would be no turning back. It was their final stand, and they were going to give it everything they had. Threx watched as the cannon powered up. The energy readings were off the charts. It was clear they were about to unleash the full power of the weapon. If the Indomitable didn't dodge this one, it would be obliterated. Aboard the HSV Indomitable, Rourke's hands were steady on the controls as he watched the approaching threat. He had been in situations like this before, but the Sci-Fi were different. They had a weapon capable of destroying entire planets. Still, Rourke knew one thing for sure. The Indomitable would not go down without a fight. Prepare the counterattack, Rourke said, his voice unwavering. We've faced worse, and we'll face this too. The crew worked quickly to prepare the ship for what could be the most powerful weapon they had ever encountered. The Sci-Fi may have been powerful, but humanity had one thing they didn't: resourcefulness. Captain, Lieutenant Hayes said, her voice filled with urgency, the Sci-Fi are charging the cannon. They're going to fire any moment. We need to move. Now. Rourke nodded. Hold steady, everyone. We're going to give them a taste of their own medicine. With a single motion, he ordered the Indomitable to shift position, reappearing right in the path of the Sci-Fi fleet. But in a new way, the ship now had a clear line to strike back. The Sci-Fi fired their weapon, but Indomitable shifted again, vanishing just in time for the attack to miss. Fire, Rourke commanded. The Sci-Fi fleet was now on the edge of collapse. Admiral Threx watched as his ships fired their final weapon, the planet killer cannon, at the HSV Indomitable, but the human ship had vanished just before the blast reached it. It was no longer just a battle. It had become a game of cat and mouse, with the Sci-Fi as the helpless prey. Threx's hands gripped the armrests of his chair, the humiliation rising in his chest. His once proud fleet was falling apart, And the human ship had not only evaded every strike, but it had struck back each time with devastating accuracy. The Indomitable seemed to be everywhere, like a shadow moving swiftly and silently. "Where is it now?" Threx barked, his voice edged with panic. He looked around the control room, his eyes searching the screens for any sign of the human vessel. But there was nothing. The Indomitable had disappeared once more. "We can't track it, Admiral," one of his officers replied, their voice shaking. "Every time we lock onto its position, it disappears. It's like it's mocking us." Threx clenched his fists. He had underestimated humanity. They weren't just clever, they were relentless, fighting with a determination that no one could have predicted. He had no idea how much longer his fleet could keep up with this. They had already lost so many ships, and now there was only one option left. They would either win or destroy everything in their path. "Prepare to fire again," Threx ordered, his voice low and tense. "This time, we will end it. No more hesitation." Aboard the HSV Indomitable, Captain Rourke watched the situation unfold from the bridge of the Indomitable. The Sci-Fi fleet had been scattered, with only a few ships left trying to hold their ground. Despite the Sci-Fi's desperation, Rourke knew they wouldn't give up easily. They were a proud species, unwilling to accept defeat. But he also knew that the Indomitable was the key to victory. Humanity had come so far, and they had no intention of turning back now. "Lieutenant Hayes, what's the status of the Sci-Fi fleet?" Rourke asked, his voice calm but focused. Hayes glanced at her console, her fingers flying across the keys. "The remaining ships are preparing to make one last stand, Captain. They've activated the planet killer cannon again, and it's charging up. They're not backing down." Rourke nodded. This was it. The Sci-Fi had used their most powerful weapon against the Indomitable already, and yet the ship had survived. They had no more tricks up their sleeves. "Prepare to engage," Rourke ordered, turning toward his crew. "We're going to end this fight once and for all. No more waiting. No more dodging." The crew responded swiftly, their movements synchronized as they prepared the ship's weapons. The Indomitable was built for speed, for precision, and for hitting back hard. Humanity had learned to adapt, and now they would show the Sci-Fi just what that meant. "Activate phase shift," Rourke said. "Make sure we're in the perfect position for the final strike." Back at the Sci-Fi command station, Admiral Threx's patience was running out. His ships had lost contact with each other, and the Indomitable had disappeared again, reappearing behind their lines. It was like chasing a ghost. He knew the Sci-Fi fleet was outclassed. Humanity's technology had taken them by surprise. He glanced at the planet killer cannon, knowing it was their last hope. "Target the human ship," Threx ordered. "This time, we will destroy it, once and for all." The cannon charged once more, glowing with the terrifying power of a weapon that could obliterate entire worlds. Threx watched as the energy beam built up, the Indomitable's position still undetermined. The human ship could not keep evading forever. This was the final attack, and if it failed, the Sci-Fi would be completely defeated. "Fire the cannon," Threx shouted, his voice rising with a sense of urgency. Aboard the HSV Indomitable, the battle was reaching its climax. Captain Rourke had watched the Sci-Fi's movements closely. He had seen the final act coming from a distance. The planet killer cannon was ready to fire again, and this time, it was not going to miss. Rourke knew the Sci-Fi would go down fighting. They were desperate, but that only made them more dangerous. However, Rourke had already planned for this. Humanity had one final card to play. "Lieutenant Hayes, prepare for maximum engagement," Rourke said. "We're not just going to dodge this time. We're going to hit them where it hurts." Hayes nodded, her fingers moving swiftly. "Aye, Captain. All systems are ready for the final strike." Rourke felt the tension in the air, but he also felt something else, a sense of resolve. Humanity was about to show the Sci-Fi that they could not just survive. They could take control. The Indomitable was humanity's symbol of strength, and Rourke knew it would live up to that legacy. Phase shift engaged, Hayes announced. We've got them locked. Ready to fire when you are, Captain. Rourke looked at the screen in front of him, watching as the Zephyr cannon charged. He knew the enemies moved before they made it. The Zephyr had fired their last shot, but this time, it would be their final mistake. Fire, Rourke commanded. The final strike. In an instant, the Indomitable's energy weapons fired, a concentrated blast of force that shot through the gap between the two fleets. The Planet Killer cannon fired simultaneously, its destructive energy racing toward the Indomitable. But Indomitable was already gone. The ship had shifted, appearing just behind the Zephyr flagship. The energy blast from the human ship hit directly, tearing through the Zephyr flagship's shields and breaking its core. In a matter of seconds, the Zephyr ship was reduced to debris, and with it, the last hope of their fleet. The remaining Zephyr ships, seeing their commander's flagship destroyed, hesitated. One by one, they began to retreat, their once proud fleet now broken and in disarray. The Zephyr fleet, once an unstoppable force, was now in retreat. The flagship, which had led them through countless victories, was reduced to rubble, and the remaining ships, damaged and disoriented, had no idea what to do next. Admiral Threx, the once unshakable leader, stood before the large view screen, his eyes wide with disbelief. The HSV Indomitable had outsmarted, outfought, and outblasted them at every turn. He had expected victory, but now all he saw was defeat. His pride, his confidence, his entire empire had been shattered by one human ship. What now? Threx muttered, his voice hoarse. We've lost everything. One of his officers, still standing at his post, spoke cautiously. Sir, there's nothing left. The human ship has destroyed our strongest weapons. We've lost communication with the rest of the fleet. The remaining ships are too damaged to continue. We need to consider surrender. Threx's fist slammed into the armrest of his chair. Surrender? Never. The Zephyr do not surrender. We fight until the last breath. His anger filled the room, but the truth behind his words was clear. The Zephyr were done. There was nothing left to fight for. He turned to the officer. Send out one final transmission. We will not flee. We will make our stand. Prepare the last of our forces. We face them one last time. Aboard the HSV Indomitable, Captain Rourke watched as the final Zephyr ships began to retreat. He knew they were in their last moments of the fight. The Indomitable had won, but not without cost. His crew had been in constant battle for hours, and now the final confrontation was within their reach. The Zephyr had no hope left. It was only a matter of time before they finally withdrew. Rourke turned to his communications officer, Lieutenant Hayes. What's the status, Lieutenant? They're retreating, sir. We've disabled their ships. The rest of the fleet is scattered, and their command structure is breaking down. They have no choice but to surrender or flee. Good, Rourke said, nodding. But let's give them one last opportunity to surrender. We won't let them make the same mistake again. He turned to the rest of his crew. Prepare a message for the remaining fleet. Let them know this is their final chance. Within moments, the message was sent out to every remaining Zephyr ship. You've lost. Leave now or face total destruction. Humanity will no longer tolerate your presence here. The message echoed across the system, carried by the Indomitable's powerful communications. The human fleet had sent its message loud and clear. The Zephyr's days of conquest were over. Back at the Zephyr command station, Admiral Threx sat in his chair, staring at the communication screen. The human message had come through, as cold and decisive as ever. It was not just a warning. It was a declaration. The Zephyr Empire was finished. The fight for this sector was over. The human fleet had conquered without firing a single fatal shot, just a relentless series of maneuvers and strikes that had forced the mighty Zephyr to retreat. Sir, the officer began, his voice hesitant, the fleet is in disarray. The remaining ships are reporting massive damage, and they refuse to engage. It's over. Threx took a deep breath, his shoulders slumping for the first time since the battle began. Prepare the fleet for full retreat. We've lost. We won't be able to fight the humans with what's left. We can't win this battle. Aboard the HSV Indomitable, the news of the Sci-Fi retreat was met with a collective sigh of relief. The crew of the Indomitable had been through a long and grueling fight, but they had held firm. Humanity had proven that they were not to be taken lightly. They had fought hard and had finally won. The Sci-Fi had been forced to retreat, leaving the sector under human control. Captain Rourke stood tall in front of his crew. We've done it, everyone. This battle is ours. We've proven to the Sci-Fi and to everyone else that humanity will not be cowed. We will fight for what's ours, and we will protect our people. The crew cheered, but Rourke's eyes remained steady. He knew that this was only one battle in a larger war. There were still many challenges ahead, and humanity would need to remain strong. But today, humanity had made a powerful statement to the galaxy. They were no longer the underdogs. They were a force to be reckoned with. Let's make sure this message is heard across the galaxy, Rourke continued. We've shown them what happens when they underestimate us. Let's remind them that humanity will always rise to the challenge. The aftermath. As the remaining Sci-Fi ships fled, the HSV Indomitable stood as a symbol of human strength and determination. The galaxy had witnessed the birth of a new power, one that would not be easily ignored. Admiral Threx, now in retreat, could only watch as the Indomitable sailed through the void, its power undeniable. He had failed in his mission, and the Sci-Fi had learned a hard lesson. Humanity was not to be trifled with. They had faced the Sci-Fi's might, and had survived. And now, they were taking control of the galaxy, one battle at a time. As the battle ended and the sector was claimed, the story of humanity's victory spread. The Sci-Fi Dominion had been forced to retreat, their empire in ruin. Humanity had sent a message that would echo across the stars. They were ready to defend their future.